Hello, welcome back everyone to the Roots Run Deep podcast. My name is Rafael, one of your hosts, and I'm here with...
Hi everyone, this is Kiara.
And today, before we get into our fifth episode topic, I kind of want to start off with a little bit of appreciation for our listeners. We have averaged around 40 listeners per month. And I really want to thank you for listening because you are the reason why we record these podcasts, really engage our community in these topics when we're talking about environmental justice. And I also want to thank Kiara for being part of the podcast and, sharing a lot of her own perspective on things. And also, shout out to the people who make it possible for it to be up every month, which is Kai Robinson and also Christian Para. And also just to appreciate this fifth episode being, I know it might sound silly, but a milestone. I feel like it's very important for us to celebrate every milestone, even if it's a small one. Just because this allows us to create a safe space for our community to actually talk about these topics. But yeah, thank you. And without further ado, today's topic is environmental racism. And as most of the listeners know, we start off with definitions and we give individual definitions from our own perspectives and experiences, and then we give a definition that we find online that's a little bit more technical. But I'll pass it down to Kiara so she could start us off with her definition of environmental racism.
My definition of environmental racism is pretty short. It's not too different from the actual definition. I feel like the term is pretty self-explanatory. Environmental racism that it has to do with the environment. I guess I don't really know how else to say that.
No, yeah, I think that's a pretty straightforward definition, and I feel like it's the one that, or when it comes to like the actual term environmental racism, I feel like when anyone hears it, it kind of like creates this interest of like, why is environmental coexisting with racism?
Yeah.
And I feel like my definition, I wrote it down on my notebook because I have a very personal way of viewing environmental racism, and I kind of wanted to make sure that it made sense to whoever was listening, because I feel like I have my own words in my brain that make sense to me. But environmental racism to me is the controlling of our four sacred elements by people who don't have the best intentions for the community that they're in or operating, which is usually BIPOC communities. Majority of them being brown or black folk. But yeah, that's my definition. And Kiara, if you could give us the technical one from online.
Yeah, environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards, pollutions, and ecological degradation experienced by marginalized communities as well as those of people of color. The reason I find that interesting is because the term is environmental racism, and I feel like I kind of like think it's interesting that even though that is within the term, that for some reason like it's not intuitive that the racism is like the big part of it, yeah. Right? That it's like it does affect people of color, marginalized communities, but I guess the racism part, it's like a racialized thing, so it has to be with like, a specific group of people. Sorry, that's like a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know, I thought that was interesting because it's kind of like I wonder why. I feel like maybe, like you're saying, maybe the term, it like brings up a lot of like, I guess, like, not even confusion, but curiosity. So like maybe people are just like, what does that even mean? Like they just hear the term, don't even really like think about it, like digest it, I guess, or break it down. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, how can you be racist to an environment?
Yeah.
Right. But that is something that, like, I feel like really piqued my interest when I first heard that term. And this is like when I think I was like a senior in high school, really reading books about like injustices in black and brown communities. So yeah, I feel like racism is like a big part of our history in this country. Unfortunately, it's one of the things that I feel like kinda, I don't know how to put it in words, but it really created, like a sense of urgency for people to organize and really push for equity, equality, or, just same rights, everyone is equal in that perspective, right? But in the cost of people losing lives, also being mistreated. And I also want to apologize right now for the train. If you guys know, North Richmond it's kind of sandwiched between train tracks.
Yeah.
So you'll hear the train in the background every once in a while, which is nice, but also, I don't know, it feels like it's one of the things that always reminds me that I'm home.
Same.
But yeah, going back to that whole racism part of environmental racism, and then going back to the definition I had written, which was, the controlling of our four elements. I feel like it could kind of like give more perspective of what that kind of looks like. As people may know, the four sacred elements are fire, earth, wind, and water. And I feel like a lot of the time, these sacred elements are not provided, or they're not accessible for a community in its its sacred way, right? Like clean water is really hard to come by in our communities. Clean air is really hard to come by in our communities. And, fire, like wildfires not even being a part of, like, for me, looking at it in a way where I'm trying to reconnect is like a way of ceremony, it's not even used in that way. It's more of a way where, like, it's just contributing to air pollution, right? So it makes me feel a little frustrated and lost a little bit when it comes to trying to establish myself in my community. Sometimes I feel like it like, as much as I want clean air, clean environment, etc., right? Me staying here is like contradicting the whole thing, the whole narrative, or like the whole idea, bigger picture of living a better life. But still, how am I, as a brown person, going to work towards the end of environmental racism, right? And I kind of just want to kind of segue into like the local examples that we see here in North Richmond. One of them being Chevron, the Chevron Richmond refinery that's been operating for about 120 years now. And I believe it was like in 1903 when like they established here in Richmond. So looking at that, and looking at the, we're on stolen land, looking at how that corporation has only one objective, and it's profits. It's never about community, as much as they like to use that narrative of the good neighbor. They've been polluting our air, water, land, and politics. So just trying to create that whole kind of imagery, how they're polluting everything, where a lot of the community is struggling. There's housing crisis. It's a food desert, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like that's a prime example of how we see environmental racism here in Richmond. And I don't know how you feel about that. If you want to share anything on what I just said, Kiara.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just like trying to like gather my thoughts, but yeah, it's definitely like interesting. I was really like listening when you were talking about the idea of like being here. It kind of does like become a part of your identity in a way of like I don't know how to explain it, but like the idea that like you can choose to leave, but that's like, I don't know. Sorry, I don't even know what I'm trying to say with that. But
No, yeah. I like, if I may kind of like jump in,
yeah.
Like leaving does not end environmental racism, right? But we tend to see it a lot sometimes when it comes to like, making it out of the hood, like people say, they tend to move to like these places where these issues of air pollution and, land contamination is not really seen. It's not a thing that's very prominent in those communities. So, that could be a form of making it out of the hood, but, that really doesn't resolve anything. And I feel like that will continue happening. I sadly feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And, going back to like that idea of a teaching of mine, being that like our ancestors built pyramids and, they didn't intend to see the full pyramid and actually practice ceremony there, but just building the structure for the future generation, right? To be themselves and practice ceremony at their own will. I feel like that's something that we are trying to establish while dismantling environmental racism. I don't think I'll ever see the full just transition of North Richmond or in Richmond, with only hoping that like the future generation does, like my children, or I feel like that's a sad part, but also I know that I'm contributing to the bigger picture, right? And I kind of want to go back to how I mentioned that there's Chevron that pollutes our politics. And I know that may sound a little funny, like how could you pollute politics? But I use that in a form of, or use those words in a form of trying to really emphasize this idea of how it's a very colonial mindset of trying to, you know, kind of get this whole control of a space and extract from it from every direction that you possibly could, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back in 2014, there was about $3 million that were spent from that corporation to, you know, influence the elections for Richmond City Council. And it's kind of funny. I was watching a documentary. I forgot the name of the documentary, but they were interviewing Eduardo Martinez, which is or Richmond's mayor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how the money that was being used, those $3 million, were actually it was used to like partner up with like the Richmond Police Association to like, you know, spread like false information, right? Like there was like billboards that were being put up that were saying that like Eduardo Martinez can't even balance his own checkbook. How is he going to be able to balance the city's budget?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like creating all these like crazy narratives to like strike fear. I feel like that's also a form where they're polluting, right? And taking control of, you know, something that I think should be an equal opportunity for anyone to try to be a part of, like when it comes to politics and stuff like that, right? Yeah, it's kind of funny to see that Eduardo Martinez is mayor right now. And, you know, I think doing great things towards that whole image or the big picture of ending environmental racism. I'm kind of glad that we have such a progressive council right now to kind of like shed light on a lot of the issues under like that term of environmental racism. Our community, you know, it does struggle. It's a food desert. It has a lot of asthma rates, like high asthma rates in North Richmond. It's 2 times greater of a child to get asthma when they're born. And, you know, there's all these things that, you know, kind of make you see, like I mentioned before, that these corporations only have one thing in mind, and it's profit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at the cost of the health of Black and brown folk. And, you know, it kind of makes us see how the true colors of what a business is in America. Sometimes it can be, again, that very colonial mindset of extractivity.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know if you want to share anything right now.
Yeah, I'm kind of also just thinking about, like, I think a lot of times people, like, I feel like environmental racism is such a broad term. Like, it can really encompass a lot of different things. And I think one thing that, like, I'm even thinking, reflecting on myself, that I tend to forget about is even, like the types of, like, work and jobs that people do. Like, that's, obviously, there's, like, environmental, like, consequences to, like, certain things. So I'm just thinking about, like, types of, like, I guess they're stereotypical types of jobs, but there's also, like, truth to it of, like, jobs that, like, I guess people of color tend to have more, just being, like, you know, I guess in a way, like, lower income a lot of times. Mm-hmm. That, like, crossover. Just thinking about, like, you know, people who work in, like, factories, I'm sure there's, like, a lot of, like, chemicals and stuff that they're dealing with constantly, or just, like, pollution of sorts, depending on the industry. But then also, like, even something as, like, you know, day to day as like housekeeping, like thinking about like all the like cleaning chemicals you're using and stuff. Like there's so many harsh chemicals in those things, and like of course, like, you know, to a degree, like there's ways to kind of go about it and like be safe, right, wearing gloves and things like that, but either sometimes people can't, or like there's like a lot of reasons that it could be like more harmful than like neutral for most people. And I just think about like how that also is like an effect of environmental racism, just because again, like I feel like the racism part is kind of the key for my understanding personally, just because it's always like it does affect the environment, obviously environmental, but also I feel like the racism is what that word being included is kind of what makes it easy to like reflect on the fact that this is like also intertwined with humans, or like, you know, with people, just because like, I don't know, I feel like they are really, really big concepts, and like there's a lot of I feel like it's a big domino effect with environmental racism. Like this has been going on for such a long time that it's kind of hard to even imagine what it would look like without it. Like I don't know, just thinking about like the way that like most of our like history has gone with like colonialism and stuff. There's always like a like upper class, lower class type of mentality. So like it's just interesting how like not only are we being like affected by the environment we live in. Obviously, I think everybody can like relate. Like even today, we're talking about how it's really hot outside. We're all like feeling that. But also just like how the opposite, like how humans impact the environment as much as the environment impacts humans. It's like the interconnectedness of it all. Because I get that they're like two kind of different things, but at the same time, they're really not. Like, right, we're all natural. Like there's a natural element to all of us. And I don't know, I just thought that was like interesting to like kind of like think about that. Like, I don't know, there's so many ways you can see it in your day to day. Obviously, like we are a fence line community, so we see it in like the most extreme way pretty much every day, right? Like there's no way you cannot pass by Chevron most days. But I wonder for like people who even don't live in like fence line communities, what that looks like, because I'm sure for the most part, everybody has in some way seen some sort of type of environmental racism. It's such a common thing. And I think in regards to like racism, it's not something that is always at the forefront of the conversation. Just because I think in a way it's almost so normalized. Like you were saying, the mentality of like getting out of the hood, quote unquote, and stuff, like it's like isolated to a place and everybody knows about it, right? I'm sure even people who have millions, billions of dollars, like they know these places exist. And it's like, it's just like a really interesting thing that happens, that like it's so centralized to an area that like it's like kind of crazy that it's not ever really questioned, I guess. Right? Like we all know like there's just those areas that are run down, that have like, you know, whether it be refinery or a landfill or whatever, like there's just those areas, and then that impacts a bunch of other like factors. That it starts impacting like housing, and then it starts impacting like education and all the other things, right? It's all interconnected, but it's just like, I guess it's such a like broad thing, but it affects literally everyone, where I think it's like a really interesting thing to kind of like sit down and deconstruct, or just like think about it a little bit. Like I think that's why I'm kind of having like a hard time even like finding my words, because I'm more of just thinking and reflecting on it than even like I don't even know what I have to say. It's just like I'm just kind of like in awe of like, wow, like this is something that's affected me my whole life and will continue to affect me my whole life. And like you said, like there's no really end to it, but it's like I think that's why you have people who like do the type of work that we do, and like people who are so passionate about doing what's right for the environment, for people, just like everybody's well-being. I don't know, it's really cool. Sorry, I just kind of lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. I think like when we look at the history of North Richmond already, North Richmond and its zonings and everything that, like, you know, is even going on until today, right? North Richmond being a redline community, and redline communities starting off from like all of that segregation stuff that was happening. And I feel like it does create like this something that we can't escape. Mm-hmm. I feel like these communities are redlined because of the zonings, the pollution, everything that could possibly be bringing the prices down of like the living cost or whatever. Not living cost. Would millionaires want to live here mm-hmm. in North Richmond? The answer is probably no. But
unless you're talking about Point Richmond.
Yeah, Point Richmond.
Areas of Richmond.
Yeah, Point Richmond. I feel like it's its own little city.
It is.
So yeah, we can get into that. I feel like it's going to be a never-ending conversation.
Yeah.
But like the history of North Richmond being like redlined, and people wanting to live in North Richmond to like even go back. Sorry. I'm kind of losing my train of thought because there's so much history to the migration from south going up north, and mm-hmm. Having communities from the south coming to Oakland, Richmond, the Bay Area, just in general, just to like escape Jim Crow. All of that stuff plays a big role into the reasons why Richmond is laid out the way it is, right? Mm-hmm. People in the hills being the people who could, afford it a little bit more, and it is away from a refinery. The people in North Richmond were basically, majority of them, Black folk, Latinos, Latinx folk that, that would work the shipyards in World War II. I feel like that whole image of like a working class, like how you were mentioning earlier, how there's all these jobs that put our community at risk sometimes. Yeah. The most dangerous jobs, some of our community members will be doing those jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't see someone that's a billionaire do all of that, because it is risky. It is something that can affect the life of someone. But yeah, then going back into the zoning, that I was just talking about the history, how like back in the day, like North Richmond, Redline and everything, we still see it today, and how we're still heavily industrialized. We see trucks in our neighborhoods, like these really big semi trucks in our neighborhoods. We see warehouses still being built in these areas. Excuse me. And not only do we have the pollution of a refinery, we also have the pollution from these other corporations who have the same objective of profit, right? Mm-hmm. Still creating pollution, not by burning oil or creating oil, but by creating warehouses that are like fulfillment centers, or bringing in more trucks, semi trucks, and making it harder for us to escape all the pollution. I feel like sometimes I feel like I've heard it more often, like within this year, but the whole particulate matter, the PM 2.5, those are, our community has like a very high percentage of that being produced here. And it's because of these semi trucks, these trains, refinery, etc., right? They're burning diesel, everything like that. And particulate matter is so fine, like it's finer than a hair follicle, I believe. And it can get into our respiratory systems, our skin, everything that could, create contact, right? And that will damage, our health. It'll create cancer. It will create asthma. It will create liver issues, That's one of the things that I feel like contribute to environmental racism, because it's always going to be the people of color who you see going to the ER with these like symptoms or illnesses that they weren't born with, right? And thinking about a conversation that I've had with, again, forgive me if I am saying your name wrong, Torm, from APEN. I believe that hearing their story kind of made me feel a little bit more emotional, because it feels like if we can't escape the air, we also can't escape the pollution that's happening in the water.
Yeah.
I believe they had a story that they shared where they said that they had community members who were fishermen, and they realized that a lot of the fish that they were catching here in Point Richmond or in Miller Knox,
Yeah.
like a lot of the fish are not healthy to eat. So it causes like health issues for community members. So just thinking about all of that, I feel like it's always our community that gets the brunt of it all. And we can't escape it. And it's because in environmental racism, you have those people who are always controlling our air, our water, and our land. And usually it can be politicians. We could talk about pipelines too, how like not just here in North Richmond, we're not the only ones facing environmental racism. We have other communities who are literally struggling to even get clean water because there can't be politicians that agree on a new I don't know what the words and the terms are, but like they think that they can't afford to use money to get clean water to certain communities, right? There's lead in those pipes, but they don't want to really look into it and get deep into how can they fix that, right? And it's nonstop. Anywhere you go, I feel like even when we went to Florida, with the Climate Justice Alliance for just transition finance training. A lot of the community members from there, voicing their opinions on how it's not, everything is being controlled there, and it's not for the benefit of the community. It's always for the benefit of the top 1%. And then also going to Indiana, hearing stories from over there, Atlanta as well. All of these communities have been oppressed for years, and it's an ongoing thing. it's an ongoing thing of redlining and just environmental racism.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think like I feel like this tends to happen sometimes with like the topics we're talking about. It gets a little heavy. It does get heavy. It gets emotional. Like I can say that pretty easily. It's one of those things where it's like, especially if you're like, you know, living in these areas that are like highly impacted by pollution and other things, like it does kind of start to feel a little hopeless. But I think that's exactly why, like, I want to put a little silver lining into all this of like the idea of why it's important to talk about these things and have conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and obviously, like, I have the privilege of doing that day to day with the job, but I think in general, like, just talking about things like this with like family, friends, strangers. I don't know if you use the internet like that. But it's just, yeah, it's really important because you do start seeing, like, once you start having those conversations, you start kind of connecting. Like, I remember it was a bit of shock to me when I first started working with like Urban Tilth and like starting to meet people from other communities around the US. It was kind of like, wow, we're all going through the same thing. That's really sad. It's terrifying. I don't know, it's disheartening, but at the same time, it's like seeing that there are people who are like in solidarity, who are like out there, you know, whether it be politically or just casually talking about things with other people. Like it's really important work. And work, I say as like just a word, work as in like, you know, it can be something that's not just tied down to like a position that you're being paid to do. But yeah, I think it is really important to recognize that like we're not alone. And like, even though I think it's like bittersweet, it's both good and bad of like, it feels good because the solidarity aspect, the community that you can build off of it, but also it is sad because like, wow, like this one really, really like terrible thing ties us all together. And just like, yeah, it's really widespread too. Like we were talking about a lot of like, you know, people leaving and things like health impacts. Like once those things are, you're exposed to certain stuff, like there's always going to be a health impact that follows as a consequence. Doesn't like matter. Like there's a difference in intensity, obviously. Like, you know, some people might get really like, I don't know. I don't even want to put a scale because I think pain and like health is pretty like, if you're not feeling good, you're not feeling good.
Yeah.
But it's just like, yeah, just like that idea of like you were saying, like cancers and stuff, right? You don't see those effects until later in life. You don't see it when you're in your teen years, when you're in your 20s, like you see it later on, right? Like that's usually how it goes. So even if you do, you know, move away or whatever, it's the effects are already there. They're not gonna like disappear. And I think that's why it is like, in a way, it is everybody's business to care more about these topics. Just because, like, again, like, yes, I think it is common to have that mentality of like, I'm just gonna make it. I'm gonna move out. I'm gonna leave. But I think like most things, you can't really just run away from your problems. So it's like it's everybody's problem. It's not just like a certain group of people's problem. Of course, there are certain people who are affected by it more, but I think it's a universal thing. And I think the environmental part of that is pretty clear. I think now like we're at a time in history where people are like, it's a pretty mainstream idea to understand like climate change and like the effects of that and stuff. So I think people are more open to hearing about the environmental part, but it's like, this is something that's been happening. It's not new. Like we're seeing certain new trends and stuff, but for the most part, this has been a constant. So it's like, yeah, it is everybody's problem at this point, literally. Like, again, like this is stolen land. Like there were people here before. Like it's all these things of like the people before us were affected by it. So who's to say that we're not going to be?
Yeah, definitely. Like, right now when you were saying that you can't just run away sometimes, and then there's stuff that's like, you know, that's already affecting us, but we're not seeing it just yet because we're young and healthy, etc. Like how people say it, right? But right now, when you were saying all of that, like I was trying to see how many vehicles I can hear in our background, and it's just like a reminder of like we can't escape that PM 2.5, that whatever that vehicle just produced right now, and it makes me sad to think that, and then also thinking back to like when I was saying that, like, there's these polluters that are polluting our land. It's like kind of another way of like saying like, hey, you could be struggling and we're going to be kicking you through the air. We're going to be kicking you down through the water. But hey, try growing your own food right now. Like a lot of people don't know that, like, if you live in Richmond, you should definitely be testing your soil. Not just because of past developments, but also because of the air pollution. A lot of the pollution that's being created by these refineries or these major polluters, it's not something that just drifts off into the air and then it disappears. It needs to come down sometime, and I was thinking about it the other day and seeing all that black soot on my truck. I drive a white truck, so seeing all of the soot kind of made me feel like, damn, like this is stuff that like's literally landing on our fruit trees, on et cetera, but we can't escape it.
Yeah.
As much as like we're growing our own food sometimes, and this is not to say that like the food in Urban Tilth is contaminated. It's not. We do testings of our soils and also making sure that we wash all of our vegetables and food that we're giving out to our community. But it kind of makes me sad on how we're limited to how much food we can produce for our community, especially for like houseless folks. Sometimes it's very crazy to me to think that like there's a shortage of food for them when there's a bunch of land that we can use, but because of it being polluted, and mostly because like we're a low income community, it kind of makes me even more frustrated. I'm not gonna say sad. It is sad, but like I feel like I've moved more towards a mindset of like frustration, and it could like burn you out pretty easy. But yeah, like another thing I've heard from other organizers is that we don't need burnt out organizers, because that could easily create more chaos. But I feel like it's very important for us to like, stay grounded and recharge our energy, because again, just how we have sacred elements, we have a sacred body as well, and we need to continue doing meaningful work. And yeah, I want to try to end this in a really good note. Just because I still do feel a little bit of that frustration, but I want to emphasize the great work that has been going on. There's a lot of great organizing that's happening right now in our communities to make sure that our voices, the voices of our community members, are being uplifted. And you're not alone, whoever's listening, and you're a resident of North Richmond or Richmond. And just for you guys who who are wondering why I always say North Richmond or Richmond, it's because I try to emphasize that North Richmond is unincorporated. But yeah, whatever community you live in, you're not alone. Going back to what Kiara said, it is beautiful to see that there is beauty in the struggle, because we have mentors that we could reach out to that are not just here in our community, but like in other communities across the states. I feel like that kind of paints a big picture of like skill sets and individuality in the movement. So that's love to everyone who is doing the work, and like you said, not just the work as a job title or something, but work in the movement. We appreciate you, and it's always love, right? But yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add on to that.
Yeah, just one last thing of like, I do in a way like, I slightly changed my mind about what I was saying about not wanting to like be so heavy, because I think to a degree there's certain conversations that should be had that are going to be heavy, and there's not really a way around that, and I think that's actually that's fine. So yeah, I just want to validate, like, to hold space for those emotions as well. I don't think it's right to just like stuff them down or just like keep moving, because I think that's exactly what leads to the burnout. So yeah, I just wanted to like validate you, and like anyone who's listening who's feeling like any sort of type of way, that's completely fine. And I would actually just like encourage you to like just sit with it and like look into it a little more.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kiara, because I do feel like you can't heal if you don't know what you're healing from, right? Yeah. So I do think that that's a big priority when it comes to any growth, any spiritual growth, any type of growth, really. Whether it be in the movement, whether or not be in the movement, growing takes healing, and sometimes you need to realize what you're healing from and really understand it for you to like move forward. I think thank you for saying that, Kiara. But yeah, with that being said, we're coming to the end of our podcast, and I kind of just wanted to take some more time to appreciate the space that we are creating here for our community. I feel like I always try to encourage the community to be in the comment section of our YouTube. And I know sometimes it's really hard because you don't know if you might be saying something and no one's looking at it, or maybe you're afraid to share whatever you are feeling just because you might feel like someone is judging, right? And I kind of want our community to kind of gear towards uncomfort, but also at your own capacity. And one way I kind of want to encourage that is by, if you would like a shout out in the next podcast, just leave a little hello or your name in the comment section, and we could shout you out. Just recognizing our listeners is important, so we could build that relationship with you, and it not sound or just be a thing of like, oh, I'm just listening to these two people talk most of the time. I want to encourage you to feel part of this space. But yeah, do you have anything else to add to that, or?
No, I don't know when this episode's going to come out, but if it's still hot by then, just keep drinking water and stay hydrated, because the heat is really dangerous and yeah, should be taken seriously.
for real. That climate chaos.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the end of our podcast, and we just want to say thank you once again, and see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.